guys, today I'm doing a very highly requested video, and that is talking all about my demi-pointe shoes. So this video is going to be talking all about demi-pointe shoes, but it's also going to be a kind of review of my Bloch Demi Pointe shoes. So I currently have two pairs of demi-pointe shoes. They're both Bloch. Here they are. You can see one pair has been used more than the other pair. So let me first just talk about what a demi-pointe shoe is. As you can see, it looks very much like a pointe shoe, and it has this structure at the front, but the sole doesn't have a shank. So you have a similar flexibility to a normal soft ballet shoe, although if I put this down you can see that's the thickness. So not only have you got a sole on the outside but also on the inside. You notice that platform when you're dancing. Obviously when you have it on, it does feel quite similar to having your foot in a pointe shoe. So let me talk a little bit about my experience of wearing demi-pointe shoes. So when I first started ballet, as everybody does, I think, I started in soft ballet shoes, just the normal kind of ballet shoes, and after a certain amount of time and building up my strength and everything, I was able to get my pointe shoes. So I never wore demi-pointe shoes at all until September. So when I started my Royal Academy of Dance Advanced Foundation classes, that was the first time that I really found out properly about demi-pointe shoes, why you wear them, and it's the first time that I started to really understand the benefits of wearing demi-pointe shoes. Just a little side note, I'm taking the intermediate exam because you're not allowed to do the advanced foundation exam until you've done the intermediate exam. So anyway, just in case you guys are confused, as you're like, I thought she was doing intermediate. I'm studying the advanced foundation and the intermediate at the same time. But anyway, so the idea of the demi-pointe shoes is that it makes the transition to pointe so much smoother, and like I never got to do that firsthand because obviously I went from soft ballet shoes into pointe shoes, but I can see now, having danced in these, why it would be such a good training shoe to get you ready for pointe. And the first reason is because of this sole that I was telling you about. Now obviously, as I said, it is different to the pointe shoe because it doesn't have an actual shank, but it's a very different feeling to dancing in a soft ballet shoe, because soft ballet shoes, the sole is so thin that basically it's very similar to feeling like you're wearing either socks or bare feet on the floor, whereas with this you have to find your balance much better, and you really need to make sure that you're not rolling in your shoe, because if you're rolling either like dropping your arches or rolling to the outside, this is gonna mean that you're way off balance, whereas in a flat ballet shoe you can kind of get away with it. So this really encourages you to notice exactly where your weight placement is, and to just find your balance in a shoe which has a very narrow sole, but also it's like fairly elevated off the floor, which is exactly what it's going to be like when you dance in pointe shoes. So that's one reason why they're a really good training shoe for pointe shoes. Another reason is that you get used to this feeling of having this shape around your toes, and you have that bit of resistance when you're dancing. Another thing that it prevents you from doing these shoes is really using your toes individually, which is actually really important when you dance contemporary and things like that in bare feet, and it's a huge help. But obviously when you're wearing pointe shoes, you're not going to be able to separate your toes and use your toes individually to help you balance. You will use your toes to help you balance, of course, but they're going to be working all together. So you're going to have to be much more on your center and things to be able to really keep your balance in demi-pointe shoes, and so that again is really helpful for pointe work. And the other reason why they're so great, and I can see so much why they're a great idea to wear either before moving up to pointe or doing it at the same time, because it'll really make you aware of these things, is the fact that they're called demi-pointes. And obviously when we talk about being on demi-pointe in ballet, we mean like releve or on your tiptoes or however you want to say it. And that is something that is so important in pointe work, and I think it gets forgotten a lot of the time, because when you go from flat, just normal soft ballet shoes into pointe, you're basically thinking mainly about being on point, but actually being able to be on demi point in point shoes is so important. It's so important, not just because it's the correct technique and it looks much prettier when you're rolling down properly through your shoes, but it's much safer to be able to have that control of your demi point. And so when you wear these, you cannot go onto point because, as I said, there's no shank to support you. So all you can do on these is go onto a normal demi point just as you would in soft ballet shoes. But the difference is that you really have to pull up and you have to use that little bit of extra effort to get onto the demi point, and then when you're up, you've got that same feeling as you're going to have with a point shoe of the block and of your toes being held together, like I said before. So it's really getting familiar with that feeling of being in this position, in this kind of shoe, because I see lots of people, especially adult ballet dancers, moving on to point, and kind of, unless your teacher is really strict about rolling down through your feet and making you do a lot of exercises at the bar where you go from point to demi to point to demi to point to demi to flat to demi to point and all of those kind of things, it can get forgotten about a lot. And it's what gives dancing on point its beautiful quality, because dancing on point is not point flat point flat, it's all about the rolling up and the rolling down. So it's so important, and I feel like these shoes really kind of make you aware of that, and it's good training for when you get onto point. And the final thing that I want to say about these demi point shoes is that you really have to work through your feet much more to be able to point your feet properly, and it stops you curling your toes, which is something else that sometimes might happen in soft ballet shoes, because you can't. And so you're really focusing on the arch, which is where the pointed foot should really come from. I mean, obviously the toes are involved, but it's very much about the arch of the foot. So they're really great for that. And because they're not just material with like a very soft sole, you really do have to work your foot that extra bit more to be able to point your foot, and that is going to be even harder in a point shoe because you do have the shank. So they are really great for strengthening your feet and for really focusing on pointing your feet, because that's something else that I sometimes see, that people, once they get the point shoes on, you know, they'll go up onto point and all of those things, but then when they're doing things like tendus or when they're not actually on the point shoe, they find it much harder to point their feet, and that's because their feet aren't strong enough and they haven't been thinking about it for enough. Whereas with these, you're going to be forced to think about it all the time because you're doing your normal ballet class and you need to be thinking about pointing your feet, and it's harder in these. So those are all the benefits to dancing in demi point. I definitely feel now, like when I take these off and I put my point shoes on, that the transition is so much nicer, and I feel like I'm already kind of really warmed up for point and I'm ready for point when we take these off and we put our point shoes on, much more so than when I was going from soft ballet shoes into point shoes. Like, that is a very different feeling, whereas with these ones it's not so much of a different feeling. Having said that, I will just say a few of the cons about wearing demi point shoes. One of them is that pirouettes are much harder, and obviously that's something that actually isn't that useful for point, because when you're doing pirouettes on point you are going to be like on point, whereas doing them in demi point, you still have more friction because you've got more on the floor, but you don't have the kind of control that you get with your toes on the floor because your feet are blocked together. So that's something that I don't enjoy in demi points. And obviously just in general they feel just a bit not as elegant, but that's kind of a good thing in a way because it means that you really have to focus and concentrate on that. Something else that people really wanted to know is if you wear padding or not in the demi point shoes. So I first of all bought these ones, which are a size 5. I'll show you the difference in size. So these are the size 5s that I bought first, and I did wear them with my toe protectors inside because in my head it was like, well, it's kind of like a point shoe, so I want to wear my toe protectors, and I also needed them because they were like big. But the problem with if you're wearing them with toe protectors is that obviously there's more of the shoe that is not your foot, if that makes sense. And because these are not point shoes, there's not as much structure here, and so you can see that they really started to wrinkle here and crease, and that's because my releve was coming from here instead of from somewhere like here, which it comes from now in these new shoes. It also means that you just don't have quite as much control when you're on releve, of course, because you've got that extra layer here between you and the floor. So it does actually make it harder in a way. It makes it more comfortable, but it makes it harder to find your balance. And so I decided to get the size 4s, and so now I wear these without any toe protectors at all, just put them on over my tights. And they are more uncomfortable, that is for sure. But I feel like my feet look much nicer in them, and I'm able to really show off the arch of my foot a lot more in these ones because my toe goes right down to the bottom, and I feel like this comes up to the point where it should on my feet, if that makes sense. So it's up to you guys. I think in general you're not supposed to wear toe protectors with them, but I know that they are uncomfortable. They do get softer, they do break in a way like pointe shoes, so don't worry if at the beginning you're feeling pressure on your big toe and it's just uncomfortable. I mean, that's kind of normal because that's not going to be comfortable, is it? Let's be honest. But I definitely prefer how these look, and every time I wear them they're getting a little bit softer and easier to wear. So I definitely prefer them without the toe pads in terms of just the way that they look, and also just how I feel dancing in them. I feel more secure dancing in them, but they are just that little bit more uncomfortable, so it's up to you guys. So the only ones that I've ever worn are these Bloch ones, but I really love the shape of them. I think they're really flattering. I love the colour. I also have the stretch ribbons on mine, which I absolutely love. I will link them in the description, and I'll actually link these shoes as well in case you want to go check them out. But these ribbons are the best, like for pointe shoes or for demi-pointes. I just love them so much. And I sew my demi-pointe shoes in exactly the same way as I sew my pointe shoes. I will link to that video as well so you guys can go and see how I sew my pointe shoes, but I use the exact same technique to sew these as I do my pointe shoes. But yeah, I think the Bloch ones look so pretty. They're obviously really well made, and as you know, my favourite pointe shoes are also Blochs, so it's a nice transition for me from the Bloch Demi to my Bloch pointe shoes. So I really hope that was helpful, guys. Leave me any questions you have in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!